I'm going to talk today about harmony. So I'm going to tell you what harmony means in English, and then you're going to tell me what it means בעברית, okay? So harmony, H-A-R-M-O-N-Y, harmony in English can mean a bunch of different things. It can mean in music, the two sounds sound good when they're played together, right? When you're singing, somebody who sings harmony sings a different part that goes together with the original, the melody. Harmony can mean colors that work well together. But I'm going to use it to mean that we get along, that people aren't fighting all the time, that we live in harmony, meaning in peace, but more than just in peace, that we can fit together in complicated ways. So how would you say that בעברית? What? Anybody in בעברית?
Shalom.
Shalom, but it's more than shalom. Harmonia? Is there a word? Okay, so good, that's easy. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today comes from Adam Smith, indirectly. It's not literally from Adam. Some of it will be literally from Adam Smith, but I'm going to use him as a way to help think about this. So I want to start with what we might call social harmony, our ability to interact with each other. So there's a puzzle. How is it that we get along? How is it that last night when we were sitting around in a circle, people were talking and interacting, and then they got up and they're drinking, and you can see everybody's having what we just call a conversation, but it's a group conversation. There's dialogue, two people, but sometimes it's a whole bunch of people interacting and talking. Now, why is that a puzzle? The puzzle is, it may just be me, but I actually care more about myself than I do about you. I'm sorry. I hate to say it. It's interesting. It's hard to say it, right? You feel bad saying it because it doesn't sound nice, right? But the fact is, and Adam Smith was really the first person in economics to talk about this extensively, we're self-interested. We're not selfish, some of us are, but we're self-interested, meaning we care more about ourselves than we care about other people. Smith has an incredible example. He says, suppose there's an earthquake in China that kills millions of people. How do you feel? Bad. You feel bad. You might, if someone told you about it, you would express your sadness about it. You might make a donation to charity to help the people. You might worry if you had a business in China. And then you'd forget about it. You'd sleep, in English we say, you'd sleep like a baby that night. The person who said sleep like a baby has never had a baby, obviously. But it's possible sometimes to sleep like a baby, meaning easily. He says, but if you knew that your finger was going to be chopped off, you had to have surgery, and you're going to lose your little finger on one hand, you'd be a wreck. You couldn't sleep. You'd be so anxious the next day worrying about the surgery. So he says, think about that. Millions of people dead, you sleep fine, your little finger, not an important finger, not your hand, your little finger, you can't sleep at night. So what does that tell you? Which is more important to you, 1 million people dead or your little finger? Your little finger is probably, in some sense, more important to you. So people look at that passage in Smith. This is in The Theory of Moral Sentiments, his first book that's not as famous as The Wealth of Nations. They say, oh, look at Smith. He has a terrible view of humanity. He thinks that we care more about our little finger than we do about millions of people far away. And Smith, unfortunately, is somewhat right. But Smith doesn't stop there. He doesn't end the story and say, and therefore people care more about, because you know what he says? He says, if you had a chance to save your little finger, but you had to kill 1 million people to do it, would you? And what's the answer? No. You would never do such a thing, he says. So there's a puzzle. How is it that your heart says, my little finger is more important, but your mind, when you have a chance to act, You save the people, you don't save your little finger. And his answer to that is a very interesting answer. He says the reason that you care more about, the reason that you would not kill millions of people to save your little finger is not because you're a nice person. It's because you know that if you act that way in life, if you put yourself in front of other people, you will have no friends. No one will like you. No one will respect you. We all understand that the essence of being a social being is to step back, even though I want to hear myself talk, right? And that's why some of us become professors, right, Omer? Right? Because we get to talk the whole time. But if I do that all the time, if I put myself first, if I put my little finger in front of millions of people, then I am a monster and no one will be my friend. He says, man naturally desires not only to be loved, but to be lovely. And what he means by that is, to be loved, we want, and we were talking about this last night, we want honor, respect. We want people to pay attention to us. And we want people to honor us and respect us and praise us. And we know, and we don't just want to be honored and praised and respected. We want to earn honor and praise and respect. We don't want to fool people. We do sometimes. We try to fool people to think we're better than we are. But we really want, deep down, is we want to earn, we want to be whole. We want to be shalom. We want the inside of us to match the outside. We want people to see us as we are, so therefore we want who we are to be worthy of being honored, respected, and loved. Okay? So if I put myself first all the time, I will not be honored, loved, and respected. I will not have very many friends, right? So in this world of our social interactions, there's a tension between my natural desire to put myself first and my realization that if I always put myself first, I will not have very many friends, I will not be respected, I will not see myself as an honorable and good person. Which raises a question. The conversations we had last night, the conversations we'll have tonight, the friends that you'll go back to and talk about the seminar, if this is great, right? What you want to do when you go back is say, how was the seminar? Well, let me tell you let me give you about 3 hours of summary. But you don't do that. With some friends, you say, it was good. Other friends, you'll say, it was good. Let me tell you my favorite part. And maybe you have one friend who is willing to listen to you for half an hour, right? So you have very complicated rules of how you interact with people. How about after this talk at lunch today? Let's say it's awful. Let's say I do a terrible job. We're sitting at lunch, and would you say, boy, that was a terrible talk? You don't do that. And if I thought it was great, I don't say, boy, that was a good talk, wasn't it? Right? That's not allowed. That is against the rules, right? There are rules for how we interact with each other that allow us to have friends, to have conversation, and these aren't just little things. This is what makes life beautiful. Is our ability to interact. It's like a dance, and again, it's like harmony. It's our ability to sing with other people and not just sing the loudest, right? I have a beautiful voice. I want to hear my voice when I'm singing. That's not nice, because you want to hear your voice too, right? So how is it that when you want to hear your voice and you want to hear your voice and I want to hear my voice, how do we harmonize? How do we get along? And the answer is there are rules. But then you have a question. Who writes the rules? Where do the rules come from? What are the rules? And if you think about it, the rules are different depending on where you live, what time you live in, what year, what era, what century. The rules change all the time. And part of being a grown-up is figuring out what the rules are, right? When you're a child, you know what the main rule is? Mine. Mine. And as you grow up, you learn that that rule is not acceptable. That if you want to get along with other people, you have to step back. So where do the rules come from? And I just have to tell you my favorite example. I had a friend in America who was Russian, came from the Soviet Union. When I would ask him, how are you? He would say, fine, like all Americans. Right? Because in America, when you say, how are you, you don't mean, how are you? You're saying, how are you in America means, I am acknowledging that you are in the room with me, and I'm alive, and you're alive, right? How are you? Fine. How are you? Fine. It's just it's a little two-step. It's a little dance, right? It's not, how are you? Well, not so good, right? That's not, in Russia, how are you means, how are you? Not so good. But in America, it's fine, meaning my turn is over, now it's your turn. How are you? Fine. How are you? Fine. Good. Let's go to the next thing. So, where do the rules come from? And the answer is, we pick the rules. But we pick the rules unlike anything else we decide. Like we might decide tonight, let's say, like we decided today that the chairs would be set in this pattern, right? Last night they were in circles, and today we decided it was like this. That was a decision that, I don't know who made it, Bob made it, Corinne made it. By the way, last night, when we had our cocktail, our reception, you decided to make a circle. Did you have a vote? Did you have a discussion? Should it be a square or a circle? I was amazed that there was anything at all. I thought we were all going to just stand around, but somehow a circle emerged. And that's the word I'm going to use a lot, emerged. Emerged, I mean, it kind of just grew out of things that we don't fully understand or write down. So a circle emerged. This did not emerge. The tables last night didn't change into this shape. Corinne or Bob or someone decided, yeah, let's make it a U. I don't know how you say it to be rude, but in English, say, let's make a U. What is it? A what? A chet? Of course it's a chet. Yeah, perfect. All right, a U, a chet, same thing. So nobody, and that decision was made in a conversation where people talked it over. Maybe if there was disagreement, like what did we do this morning? Oh, plastic, they didn't keep the contract. What do we do? Should we have a lawsuit? Should we make a fight? Should we just show that we're unhappy? Somebody had to make that decision. But who makes the decision about the rules of our social behavior? And the answer is nobody. But if it's nobody, if nobody's in charge of what is socially acceptable, then where do the rules come from? Okay? So I'm going to give you Adam Smith's answer. He says, and by the way, we totally take for granted that the rules are there and what comes out of the rules exists. You know what the name is for the result of these rules? The name is civilization. It's the whole thing. We don't think about how incredibly beautiful it is that we all get along pretty well. Not all the time, of course. Doesn't work perfectly. We make mistakes all the time. But the fact that we can get together and chat and not be always fighting is a really beautiful thing that allows everything about life to go on. It's very, very important. It's not just about if somebody has a tragedy that you make a sad face. That's important. That's one of the rules, right? If somebody says, I had a terrible thing happen, you make a sad face. When Corinne tells me that her daughter's engaged, I make a happy face, right? That's the rule, right? That's the rule. Make a happy face. The more I know Corinne, the more genuine, the more real my happiness is. But even if I've got a lot on my mind, which I did when I got here, I'm thinking about my talks, I got to worry about my family, they're coming soon to Israel. When Corinne says that, I don't go, oh yeah, great, that's good. I go, hey, how are you, right? I stop and I show her that I'm happy for her, right? Right? That's one of the rules. So it's everything. It fills our whole lives in all kinds of ways. So it's really important. So here's Adam Smith. Here's what he said. I'll read it slowly. There's one word in here that's very hard. Most people in English don't know what it means. The word is vicegerent. It's a very obscure old word. A vicegerent, I would translate as a representative, a deputy, someone who helps you, okay? So here's what he says. He says, the all-wise author of nature, and by that he means God, okay? But if you don't like God, you can have it be evolution. The all-wise author of nature has in this manner taught man to respect the sentiments and judgments of his brethren. Meaning, the English phrase is hardwired. It's part of me, is the desire to be approved of by the people around me. To be more or less pleased when they approve of his conduct, and to be more or less hurt when they disapprove. He has made man, if I may say so. I love that phrase, if I may say so, because he feels it's a little bit gauche, a little bit forward to talk about what God had in mind. So he's being a little bit respectful. He has made man, if I may say so, the immediate judge of mankind. And has in this respect, as in many others, created him after his own image, and appointed him his vicegerent upon earth to superintend the behavior of his brethren. So what he's saying is that when you do something that's not nice, God doesn't hit you with a lightning bolt, right? He doesn't kill you. He doesn't give you a disease. If you do something not nice, you know what the punishment is? The people around you will disapprove of it and make you feel bad. That's what he's saying. They are taught by nature to acknowledge that power and jurisdiction, which has thus been conferred upon him, to be more or less humbled and mortified when they have incurred his censure, to be more or less elated when they have attained his applause. Complicated English, but what he's saying is, deep down inside us, we want the approval of the people around us, and we want to avoid their disapproval. And that keeps me in line. That is an incentive system for me to behave kindly to the people around me. He's saying that we learn by looking at other people what is good and what is bad behavior. And that approval and disapproval, those are feedback loops. You know what a feedback loop is? People know what a feedback loop is. Okay, a feedback loop in electronics is if I have a microphone and I have a signal and it conflicts with some other signal in the room, you get a loud noise. You ever hear with a microphone, you start squealing? That's feedback, okay? But feedback here in everyday language means if you do something, I give you feedback, meaning I tell you how you're doing. I have a friend I interviewed for my podcast, Arnold Kling. He says education is feedback, meaning the way you teach people is you let them know whether they're understanding it or not. If you don't let them know, they can't learn. So to learn, you need feedback. You need information coming back to you that tells you whether you're doing right or wrong, whether you understand it or not. And what Smith is saying is that your approval of my actions and your disapproval of my actions is feedback. It's telling me, how am I doing? It's information about how I'm doing. And what a feedback loop is, the loop means it reinforces, that's a positive feedback loop, it reinforces good behavior and it punishes and discourages bad behavior, okay? So if I stood here and I put a chair down and I decided to read you my lecture for the next half hour, I would watch, and what your faces would tell me is that was a bad decision, right? Because I'd see you lose interest. You'd start checking your phone, and I'd get feedback from you that I'm doing a bad job. And what would that encourage me to do if I got invited back? don't do that again, right? That's a feedback loop. So what Smith is saying is that we have these feedback loops of approval and disapproval. You do a good thing, I smile at you, I say thank you. You do a bad thing, I raise an eyebrow. Right? Or I might say, hey, that's wrong. Why'd you do that? That was selfish. You hurt that person. Those are the things that influence our behavior and teach us what is right and wrong. And that creates the rules. The rules of civilization, the rules of harmony emerge from our interactions with each other. They are not imposed from the top down by experts. There are people who claim to know what the rules are, right? I'm sure you have some of them in Israel. We have them in America. They write books about it. Here's what you do at a dinner. Here's how you should behave. Here's the clothes you wear in certain settings. I mean, it's just a quick story because it's such a good story, okay? What time is it? 9? Okay, we have time for it. Good. It's 1989, and there's a reception for President Reagan at a hotel in Chicago. A lot of CEOs, big shot business people, are invited to this reception. So one of them, I think his name was Herb, I want to say it's like Greenhaber, I can't remember. But anyway, he's the CEO of a company called A.T. Kearney, which is a consulting firm in the United States. And he's so excited to meet President Reagan. He comes to the reception, and he looks around, and he realizes he is the only person in the room not wearing a tuxedo. You know a tuxedo? Well, fancy, in America we call it black tie. He has a suit on. He's not in an undershirt, right? But he did not wear a tuxedo. He's horrified. Why? Why? Tell me. He broke the rules. Yeah. Nobody sent him a memo that said, when the President of the United States comes, wear a tuxedo, but he didn't know that was a rule, but it was a rule. The story ends very nicely. It's at the Four Seasons Hotel, which is one of the nicest hotels in the world. The manager of the hotel comes up to him and says, you look unhappy. Can I help you? He says, well, I see everybody's got a tuxedo except me. He said, come with me. The president was late, so he had a few minutes. He went to the restaurant of the hotel. The maitre d', the person at the front of the restaurant, is standing there. The manager of the hotel says, Jack, this is so-and-so from A.T. Kearney. He needs a tuxedo. The maitre d' is wearing a tuxedo. He says, excuse me, steps outside, goes to the men's room, takes off his tuxedo, brings it back. He puts it on, doesn't fit so well. They bring someone to tailor it right there on the spot. This is the greatest customer service story to me in the history of the world. An amazing story. So there are people who say, I'm sure there's something in a book written somewhere that if you see the President of the United States, by the way, I have a photograph of the American Economic Association, which is the Association of Economists in America, visiting the President of the United States in 1912. And it shows them in front of the White House. Every single man in that photograph, and they're mostly men, and I'm not sure any of the women were economists, they might have been wives, 1912. It might be 23, I can't remember, it was before 1925. Every single man in that picture is wearing a hat. Every single one. Because in 1912, if you went to see the president, you wore a hat. Today, nobody wears a hat when they go see that rule changed somewhere. Interesting discussion, won't go into it, we'll talk maybe at lunch, when and why that rule changed. But now you don't have to wear a hat when you see a president. In Israel, if you go to shul on Shabbat, you don't have to wear a tie. In America, in some synagogues, you have to wear a tie. Some you don't, but there's complicated rules for all these things. Who writes them? Nobody. They come about. They emerge. They are decided by us, but not by a vote, not by the normal ways we decide things. Now, is Bob thinking, I invite this guy to talk economics, and he spends the first 40 minutes of his talk on psychology and sociology, right? Is this economics? Well, I would say it is economics, because economics is about how things, one of the things economics is about, how do things happen? How is it that order, that patterns emerge without centralized coordination? How is it that things can emerge from the bottom up without someone being in charge to impose what people do, right? Because that's the other way to get people to behave. So now I want to take the same idea and apply it to commercial, financial, what we would traditionally call economic interaction. Now, what's the analogy? I said it's a puzzle that we get along. You could say it's a puzzle that we get along economically, because we could all be self-sufficient. I could make things for myself, you could make things for yourself, just like you could sit and entertain yourself without friends. You know, my analogy, my image for this is the airport. I don't know what it's like at Ben Gurion, but in American airports, you see people scattered all around by themselves traveling, and they're all doing the same thing. They're staring into their phone. Maybe they're eating. Maybe they're looking off into the distance. Maybe they're reading something. But nobody says, hey, where are you going today? It's against the rules, right? Hey, this is a beautiful day for a trip, isn't it? When that happens, you kind of go, yeah, and you move away, right? Because that's against the rules. But that could be the way life is every time, all the time, and it's not. But that's airport life. Similarly, economic life could be, I do my thing, you do your thing. Some people are better than others at making things. Some people have more stuff. That's not the way it works. We trade, we interact in very complicated ways. Now, trade, and by trade I mean, the word trade in English means two things. It means I make a deal with you. That's trade. But we also use it to mean trade across borders, right? International trade. So trade sometimes means countries exchanging, but it really means any kind of exchange where I offer something to you and you give me something back in return. Trade encourages us to be sympathetic to each other. We don't think about that much, but think about how strange that is, right? If I want something from you, how do I get it? I have to think about what you might want that I have. I have to put myself in your shoes, which of course is what I have to do socially as well. When Corinne is excited about her daughter, and I'm not as excited as she is. I can't be, right? But I put myself in her shoes. If I want to make the right face and give the right emotional response, I have to think about what I would feel like if my daughter were engaged, right? And that's how I know how to make the right face, right? That's what I do. But similarly, if Corinne wants something from me, or I want something from her, I want to buy something that she has, I have to think, what do I have? I have to think, what are Corinne's needs? What does she want? And that's what trade is. Trade is about figuring out what other people want. Now, in a world with money, that's a world of barter. Barter is when I trade a chicken for wheat, right? That's the old-fashioned kind of trade. Now, with money, same thing though. If I want to earn money, I have to figure out what other people might value that I can do that would allow me to make a living and to work. We think of economics as competition. And we use that word. And it's a very dangerous word in two senses. Competition, give me some different kinds of competition besides economic competition. sports, right? Sports is the main kind of competition we think about. In sports, there's different kinds of sports, but think about the Olympics. There's the gold medal, there's the silver medal, there's the bronze, and after that, there's nothing. Just by the way, the 1972 U.S. Olympic team in basketball has never accepted the silver medal that they won in the 1972 Olympics. Does anybody know about that Olympics? About the basketball part of it? It's a terrible tragedy. It was in Munich. It's when the Israelis were murdered. But the basketball part of it was that the Russians cheated. They cheated. It's black and white. The game was over. They restarted the clock. They had used a timeout they didn't have. The Americans won. They started again. I mean, it's just, the Americans felt they were totally cheated. So when it came time for the medals, they said, we're not going to take it, which is crazy. It's bizarre when you think about it now. They refused the medal. They vote every once in a while to whether they should accept them now, because the American Olympic Committee wants them to accept it, and they needed a unanimous vote. They never get it. They get about half now. There are people who say, I want my grandchildren to see the medal. Others say, I will never vote for it, and when I die, I'm putting in my will that my children will never accept it. They're not going to take it because silver, you think, well, silver's nice. No. The only thing that matters is gold because they won. That's one kind of competition. That is the very normal thing we think of. When you think of competition, there's a what? A winner. There might be, everyone else is, by the way, it's very popular in America to say everybody's a winner. And they give out trophies to all the teams and all the players, which is a lie. Everybody's not a winner. It's not true. There's a winner, and then there's a bunch of losers. Now, you can debate whether second is a kind of better loss than third, but first means something. It means first. So everybody else is not first. But that's not what economic competition is usually about. First of all, economic competition produces many winners. So, for example, there can be room in, here's an example we're in right now. There's lots of hotels, not one hotel. It's not one hotel chain that wins, that dominates, that beats everybody. Yes, some do better than others. Some get ahead for a while or do better, get more market share. But there's not one hotel that dominates the whole thing. Some parts of economics that there is, right? Google is almost the only search engine. There's a couple more, though, even in Google's case. So nobody wins and everybody else loses, usually. Sometimes two companies will fight it out and one does better than the other and the other one goes out of business. That can happen. But in general, economic competition produces many winners that make profit. But more importantly, who's competing? Is the competition between me, the customer, and you, the company? Or is it between the different companies? Well, it's all of that at once. But usually, and I'll use the same example that was used last night, usually, if I can get my phone out of my pocket, so Apple's fighting with Android, which is fighting with Amazon now has a phone. It's not doing very well. But we all win from that competition. We get an inexpensive phone that does wonderful things. So there's no, the competition, it's true, I'd like a lower price than Apple charges, right? So there's some kind of struggle and tension there. But I'm pretty happy with the price. I still like it. I still get lots of benefit. So that's one sense in which I think the phrase competition is misleading. It suggests there are winners and losers, but the other sense, which is more important, is that even though there's competition between companies trying to get ahead, there's an immense amount of cooperation among economic activity and economic actors. Just like we have, again, go back to our social example, we compete for who gets to talk, right? In my book, I talk about the fact that, if you're taking more than half the time, maybe you should think about talking a little bit less and listening a little bit more, right? You have to make room for other people. You have to cooperate when you have conversation. And there's a tension between competition. I want to be first. I want to talk more versus cooperation. Oh, wonder what the other person has to say. Oh, let's not talk all the time, right? And similarly, in economic activity, economic interaction, there's competition. I'm trying to do better than the other company, but there's a ton of cooperation between people who work together on the same company, the same project, the same product, but also, more interestingly and more complicated, across products. So think about how if I produce wool, my wool is used in 50 or 100 different things. How do they, think about this, I'm the wool maker, you're the sweater maker, you're the coat maker, you're the whatever. Everybody's got a different, some are using it in the lining of something. How is it that you guys, who are all using wool, how do you get along so well? Why don't you, who make sweaters, say, hey, we should get all the wool? Sweaters are more important than jackets. That doesn't happen. Why is it that we never fight over who gets to use what? Okay, so I want to talk about that now. I want to give you an example. An example I use is, suppose hundreds of millions of Chinese who live in the country decide to come to the city. And they start sending their children to school. And when their children go to school, they start using pencils. So now the world needs a lot more pencils. Maybe. Or maybe some people who used to use pencils should stop using pencils so that the Chinese can have some. So think about how that challenge, and it's all based on change. When things change, how do we figure out what's going to happen? Because we have a conflict. So, pencils are made from wood, graphite, which is a thing that grows in the ground, aluminum for the little part at the bottom, rubber for the eraser. After the Chinese are going to send all their kids to school, there should be shortages of all these things. So how do we solve this problem, and who's in charge of it? Here's the way we could solve it. We could ask people who are currently using pencils to switch and use pens. We could produce more pencils. If we produce more pencils, we need more graphite, we need more wood. Where are we going to get that from? Well, we could ask people to plant more trees. We could ask people who are using wood to use less so that there'd be more wood available for the pencils. So here's 3 possible solutions to the Chinese challenge. Ask people who are using pencils to stop. Ask people who want the pencils, they can't have them. Sorry, Chinese, no pencils for your kids. We don't have enough. Or we could get more pencils, but that means less of something else that the wood and the graphite and the aluminum are currently being used for. What's the right answer? How do we deal with the challenge that Chinese people are sending their kids to school and want to use more pencils? I have no idea. I don't know what the right answer is, and I don't even think you could calculate the right answer. But I know that a good answer would take into account the following. How much easier is it to use a pen instead of a pencil? For people who are using cedar, which is the kind of wood that are in pencils, for other things, could they switch to something else? How hard would that be? We could ask, could they find a substitute so they could do without the cedar? We could ask some of the kids who want to use pencils, could they use a pen instead, even though they want a pencil? So there's a lot of information we'd like to have to decide the best way to cope with this change in the pencil market. But we can't gather that information. It would take literally 100 lifetimes. And most of the information, we wouldn't even know how to answer the question. If I said to you, do you think you could get by without a pen or a pencil? Could you go without a smartphone for a year? Right? No, that'd be horrible. How horrible would it be? What would you be able to do instead? Well, you probably couldn't answer that question until you were faced with the challenge. So it's not something you can look up and just sort of measure. So the information that we need isn't easily gathered. How does the decision get made to how we cope with the pencil challenge? We don't have a vote. There's no pencil czar. There's nobody in charge of pencils. There's no graphite or cedar czar. No one makes the decision. We don't get all the people who use pencils and bicycles and wood furniture and all the things that are used out of the products that we're talking about. We don't put them in a room and say, hey, we're Yet somehow the decision gets made. It is not the best decision, for sure. It can't be. But I don't know what the best decision would be. But it has many remarkable characteristics, and somehow everybody adjusts. And you know how we know it works? Because 100 million, more than 100 million, a few 100 million Chinese did go from the country to the city, and they did use more pencils, and we didn't notice. Isn't that the greatest? When you went to the store to buy a pencil, nobody said to you, are you kidding? They're all in China this year. No pencils for you. Think about that. The example I like in the United States is Super Bowl. On Super Bowl Sunday, it's the biggest pizza day in the year. More pizza is sold on Super Bowl Sunday than any other day of the year. So you'd think it'd be impossible to get a bagel. You go into a store to get a bagel, they're there. They're waiting for you. You know, we're going to see a film tonight about Walter Williams. I don't know if he's going to use this line, but I love this line. I heard this from him. He says, here's my relationship with my grocery. I don't tell them I'm coming. I don't tell them what I want. And I don't tell them how much I'm going to buy of what I want. But if they don't have it waiting for me, I fire them. That's my relationship with my grocery. And on Super Bowl Sunday, even though you'd think all the dough would go to pizzas, it doesn't. Somehow they set aside enough for the people who don't like pizza. It's an incredible thing. How does that happen? And the answer is, which we're not going to talk about in detail, is that there are feedback loops of price and profit and loss that encourage businesses to plan accordingly. And that's what Hayek called a marvel, because it really shouldn't work very well. It's crazy that it works. But it works very well, because we're constantly changing and coming up with new demands. And we were talking last night, Sivan and I were talking last night, Maureen, about low-carb diets, right? There's a fad in the world to eat fewer carbohydrates. You'd think if you don't like carbohydrates, you can't have a sandwich. But now there's low-carb bread. I didn't order it. It just showed up. A whole bunch of things showed up that are low-carb because the world sees that there are people who don't like to eat carbohydrates as much as they used to. But there's still tons of bread for everybody else and tons of potatoes. And all of a sudden we don't say, well, sorry, we're out of this or out of that. We're never out of anything, and we never fight about it. And the rich don't get all the pencils, by the way, which is also crazy. You think they just get them all, but they don't. No one person decides. We do. We decide the mix. Remember I said there are different ways to deal with the pencil shortage, pencil challenge. We can make more pencils. Some people could do without. We don't have a vote about what the best answer is, and yet somehow we decide through all of our millions of little interactions with sellers and buyers, we decide how that solution emerges. And I would argue that that kind of decision isn't like any other kind of decision that we make when we use the phrase decision, the word decision. When we say I made a decision, we mean I voted, I had a compromise, we came to a consensus. That's not what's happening here. Something stranger and more hidden is what's happening. And what economics helps you do is see the hidden forces that tie the whole thing together. So let me summarize, and then if we have time, we'll take a few questions, which seems unlikely. No, we still have time. It's only, right, we go till 10, right? Yeah, we got plenty of time. So there are things in this world, in our universe, that are orderly, that we don't have to do anything about in nature. The planets go around the sun, the earth goes around the sun. We don't have to lean into the curve. We don't have to all get out and go like this when the seasons change to make sure we're going to make the turn around the sun. It just works by itself. I don't have to tell my lungs, breathe, breathe, all right? If I cut myself, I don't say to my body, close that up now, please. That's a bad thing, all right? I don't have to think about it. I don't concentrate. These are things that happen automatically. There are other things in our life that if we want them to happen, we have to be totally focused and have a plan and execute the plan. The dishes. The dishes don't do themselves after dinner. You don't just put the dishes in the sink and say, okay, invisible hand, you wash those up, all right? Doesn't work that way. You have to have a plan. You have to do the dishes. You got to rake the leaves. You got to shovel the snow. You got to clean up your room. Your room doesn't clean itself up. That's another category of things in life. So we have things that are orderly, that we don't have to deal with at all, like the planets. We have things that are orderly that we have to do all the time and be focused on, like keeping our room clean and our clothes clean and our dishes clean. We got to have a plan and we got to do it. But there's this third category of thing, which sometimes is called an invisible hand. I don't always like that phrase because Adam Smith didn't use it to mean this, actually. And that's a long story we aren't going to go into. But it's a very nice metaphor for the idea that there are some things that are orderly, that humans create without intention. There are things that are orderly that we create without intention, without design, without planning. They emerge. The order emerges through our interactions, through a set of rules that no person individually writes. A set of processes like prices and profits that no individual creates or writes. It's like a thermostat. You know what a thermostat is? That's the thing on the wall. You set the temperature, and if it gets, in the winter, if it gets cold, the furnace comes on automatically. Ever think about what a fantastic thing that is, right? Imagine buying a house, building a house, and the thermostat creates itself. I mean, the thermostat's an amazing thing already. Oh yeah, well, we're going to have a thermostat. Yeah, of course. What if it came by itself? But that's what our economic life is. The price system is a thermostat that creates harmony and order without fighting. And it's a thermostat that nobody created. Nobody said, wouldn't it be cool? Wouldn't it be fantastic if prices, when they went up and down, sent signals to people about what to buy more of and less of so that we could all get along economically and not fight all the time and steal stuff from each other? Yeah, that would be great. Oh, it's already here. Right? That's what that system does. Sometimes I call it invisible hand. Sometimes we call it a market. It's not the best word because a market to me means Machne Yehuda, right? You know what that is, right? Machne Yehuda is a market. That's what we think of. But the market I'm talking about isn't in one place and it can't be seen. It's hard to even visualize it. It's hard to even imagine it. One of the challenges of this understanding is that one of the lessons is that it's very hard to change the outcome. And we don't like that as human beings. When we do try to change it, we often get unintended consequences. And Omer Moab is going to talk about that later, how when you interfere with the feedback loop, sometimes things happen that you didn't anticipate. Now, this talk does not mean that every problem solves itself automatically. The invisible hand is not perfect. Pollution is one example where the feedback loops don't work in the right direction. My natural incentive is to want to dump my garbage in your yard so that you have to clean it up. That's not good. But there are processes that have their own logic and power, and interfering with them is harder than you think. I'm going to give you a couple examples of what these same kind of phenomena, which I call emergent phenomena, emergent orders, things that have patterns that even though they have patterns, nobody designed it, nobody created it, nobody's in charge. At dinner tonight, there's going to be a level of noise in the room. And it might be so loud that it's hard to hear the person talking next to you. And when it's hard to hear the person talking next to you, what do? You talk louder. That's the bad kind of feedback loop. Because then everybody else thinks, oh, it's getting noisy in here. I better raise my voice. So there's a certain level of noise that emerges in a dining room that can be a little too loud and that is very hard to change. If you say, hey, everybody, let's keep it down a little bit. It works for a little bit and then it comes back up. It really depends on the acoustics of the room. A lot of times with these kind of systems of interaction, we look at the symptoms rather than the underlying cause. So what looks like the cause of the problem in the dining room that you can't hear, it looks like the cause is the noise is too loud. That's not the cause. That's the symptom of the acoustics of the room. I'll give you another example. Traffic. Where I live, it's as if a memo was written that says, between 4 and 7 p.m., everybody drives slowly. Right? The data is consistent with that theory. Everybody is driving slowly. Whose fault is it that we're all going 30 when we want to go 60? It's nobody's fault. You could say, but it's your fault. You're the one driving 30. Drive faster. You can't. Is that strange? Everybody wants to drive faster. They can't. So what's the cause of the problem? That's an interesting question. I would argue the cause of the problem is that the road is priced at 0. So anybody can enter the road who wants to. And when you enter the road, you don't take into account, there's no feedback loop that takes into account the full effect of your actions on those of others. So you get on the road sometimes when you are harming a lot of people relative to your benefit, because you want to get there even though it's going to take a little longer. So you get on the road. So how do you fix that? The way we try to fix it is it seems like a good idea. Let's build a train between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. We have one, right? Hey, is it not finished yet? No? When's it going to be finished? 2017. Okay. Someday it'll be finished. Do you think it's going to solve the traffic problem between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv? I'll bet you $1 million it will not solve the traffic problem. What we do in the United States is we build trains, we add buses, but our favorite thing is we widen the road. And it works for a while, and then the roads fill up again because it doesn't solve the underlying cause of the problem. It deals with the symptom rather than the underlying cause. A lot of these problems have this characteristic that if you deal with the symptom rather than the cause, you can actually make things worse. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but you think about it, it's the natural impulse of human beings and politicians to solve the symptom, right? It's like saying you have a temperature, you're sick, you have the flu, you're running a fever, right? You take out the thermometer. Oh, I can fix this. Let me get you a different thermometer that will show that you don't have a fever. That doesn't solve the problem. You will not have a fever in the sense that your temperature might still register as normal, but you'll still be hot. Doesn't solve the problem. The analogy I use is that if I come home and the music that my children like is playing very loud, I go over to the volume and I turn it down. There's no knob for the traffic. Where's the knob to turn down the traffic? It's not obvious that there is such a knob. Now, you could change the prices, and that would, but that isn't intuitive. That doesn't turn down the traffic. That just changes something. But I want to turn down the traffic, so I widen the road. It doesn't work. I don't like the price of real estate in Tel Aviv, so I want to turn down the price. It's a natural thought. Maybe it is not the right way to solve the problem. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not talking about anarchy, although a lot of the things I'm saying here are about problems that solve themselves. As I said, not all problems solve themselves. Government, Bob mentioned earlier, law, courts, they're very crucial for allowing us to establish the interactions we need. And I would close by saying the world is a complex place. The world is a complex place. There are interactions that we don't always understand or see even, that hold us together, that create harmony. And to me, that's really what economics is all about. Thank you very much. Your name?
Nitzan.
Intan?
Nitzan.
Insan.
He's saying that most of the time we don't know who makes the rules. But I think that we know that humans make the rules. And the strongest, and most of the people will listen to the strongest person in the room. So for example, if everybody wears a hat, when they go to see the president, they probably saw some strong person who wear a hat before, and they say, I should wear a hat too. Maybe it will help me. Maybe it will help me to survive. Maybe it will help me to get better.
Yep.
And lobbyists and advertisers know that kind of thing. So if they want to change the rules, they can do it by going to the government and try to ask them to change the rules.
They can try.
Or to advertise people that wear something else, and everybody will see them and say, hey, they look nice, they wear these clothes, I wear them too. They act like that, I will act the same way because it will help me to survive. It
Sure.
help me to. So I don't think that nobody makes the rules, or we don't know how the rules are making. The strong person make the rules.
What do you mean by the strong person?
The one with the most influence.
Okay, so let me. There are such people. The Academy Awards, once a year, people watch those to see, for 100 reasons, but one of the reasons they watch is to see what the most loved people are wearing and doing. Now, there are other people who say, whatever they do, I'm going to do the opposite. Because they don't think those are lovely people. But they're influential, somewhat. I think it depends. Let's take a few examples. My favorite example of the other side of the influence case would be the word Google. So Google is a verb, right? I Googled last night. I'm going to Google that later. Did you Google that? Who decided that it's okay to use a company name as a verb? Who decided? We did. It just happened. No, not a strong person. In fact, just one more example. So the phrase blog is what we use to describe a blog. But that wasn't the original word for it. It was originally, what's the original, where does blog come from? It's weblog. Weblog became shortened to blog. The New York Times, which is a very influential paper, decided that blog was too casual and that they would require weblog for their reporters. That didn't last very long. They now use blog because they lost. Google's a more interesting case. Google, you cannot use Google in a memo at Google. If you work at Google and you use Google as a verb, you're in trouble. They don't like it. They tell you, rewrite the memo. Why? Does anybody know why?
Maybe they are afraid of the same reaction as you said in the Academy Awards. Maybe if they use this word, maybe people will be intimidated to call it that way. Or
interesting. It's actually a legal reason. If everybody uses the word Google, which they do, Google loses control of the word Google. They cannot use it as their trademark anymore. They don't have legal control over it. So in English, I don't know about in Hebrew, but in English there are a number of words that have become everyday words. Does anybody know any of them? What? No, it's Xerox, which we don't use anymore because people don't do much Xeroxing. But to make a photocopy is called Xeroxing because Xerox invented the first photocopier, and people used to say, "Would you go Xerox this for me?" What do you blow your nose with? A Kleenex. Kleenex, the company Kleenex, can't use Kleenex as its own. It's an everyday word in English now. So Google doesn't want Google to be a verb. Can they stop it? Can't stop it. It's not up to them. It's up to us. Now, what?
They can close the search engine.
Well, they could, yeah. It actually wouldn't matter. Here's the amazing thing. If Google said, we're quitting, and now everybody's going to use DuckDuckGo, nobody's going to say, I DuckDuckGo'd you last night. They're going to say, I Googled you last night using DuckDuckGo, right? It's an amazing, bizarre thing. So, let me agree with Itzan, and then I'm going to disagree a little bit. So, I won't ask you to raise your hand for a variety of reasons, but I want you to think about whether you put deodorant on this morning. Okay? Some of you did, maybe some of you didn't, okay? I'm not an everyday deodorant guy. I'm going to tell you right now, I put it on this morning, but I don't put it on every day, okay? I don't like it. I actually believe I don't sweat that much. Worse, I could believe, I don't believe this, I could believe that my sweat smells so sweet that it's better not to use deodorant, okay? Now, deodorant is an artificial thing that the people who make deodorant obviously want us to think that deodorant is necessary, that we smell bad if we don't use it, and it's kind of a gimmick. It's a weird thing. In many ways, it's a social convention. It's a rule, one of these rules, right, that you should put deodorant on. So there are advertisers that have influence on us like that all the time. But there's also advertisers that can't do that. They just can't. I mean, it's an unbelievable thing. Smoking, there's still a relatively large amount of smoking in Israel. In the United States, smoking is so uncool. Nobody, in 1950, if you wanted to be cool, you smoked. And advertisers created an image of smokers as cool. I have a poster of Ted Williams, who's a great baseball player, an athlete, talking about how great smoking is from 1950 something. I have another poster of doctors talking about how great smoking is. So that was an ad campaign that obviously was in the interest of the tobacco companies, and people thought it was cool. But somehow we destroyed that. I don't know who destroyed it. There were people who tried explicitly, thought leaders, doctors, surgeons, politicians tried to get people to stop smoking, right? Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't work. In the United States, Nancy Reagan, said the president's wife, had a campaign, just say no to drugs. If you look at drug use in the United States after her campaign, drug use goes down. Of course, you look before the campaign, drug use is going down. Her campaign had no effect whatsoever. In fact, easily could have had the opposite effect. People said, well, if Nancy Reagan says don't take drugs, I'm taking drugs, right? So it's very hard. There are always people trying to influence, and I would say steer or push or nudge the social system and the economic system to their own benefit, as well as to what they think of as the benefit for others, right? There are plenty of people who tried to get people to stop. Here, I'll give you another example. Right now, there are e-cigarettes, electronic cigarettes, that, as far as I can see, are pretty neutral in terms of health. Who's against electronic cigarettes? Who thinks they're bad? Tobacco companies. You know who else thinks they're bad? People who are getting people to stop smoking. Because if people start using e-cigarettes instead of cigarettes, they're not going to have anything to do anymore. So they're very worried about them. I'm not sure it could lead to smoking, they're saying. It could, it might be right. But they have a natural interest that I'm aware of. I see it. Everybody understands that the tobacco companies are going to say they're actually quite dangerous. They look safe, but they're dangerous. Because they have a self-interest. We understand that. But the other people maybe are also sometimes against things. So you should always be skeptical. You should always be wary and careful of what people say. But in general, it's very hard to get people to do things as a group, okay? So I'll talk about the hat thing for a minute because you brought it up. It was an interesting thing. A lot of people believe that Americans stopped wearing hats. Does anybody know what the argument is? They say it was because of John F. Kennedy. President Kennedy, they say, who was young and handsome, and like you suggested, he didn't wear a hat. I'm thinking, well, maybe I won't wear a hat. Because, I gave the example of visiting the president, but it wasn't just visiting the president. Anytime you had a formal event where you thought you're supposed to dress up, wear a tie, men wore a hat. Starting around 1960, when President Kennedy was elected, people stopped wearing hats. Was President Kennedy the cause of the reduction of hat wearing in the United States? The answer is probably not, because the usual story is they say, well, he didn't wear a hat at his inauguration. He was like the first president. Well, if you look at his inauguration, he's wearing a top hat. He's wearing a big-time hat. So he did wear a hat. So that's not consistent with the theory. Secondly, politicians in general don't like to lead on fashion. They don't want to look different, right? They want to look like everybody else. So if I said to you, think about this. If I said to you, think about anything, let's get this thing to happen. Let's make Israelis more polite. Is that a good idea or a bad idea? Who thinks it's a good idea? How would you do it? Do you think it would be enough to let's have some famous people get on TV and say, let's be polite? It's going to be hard to do. Let's have people get more religious in Israel. Oh, that'll be easy. We'll just get some movie stars to become religious. One, that's very hard. Two, is that going to make everybody want to be religious? These are things that are all these things. This seminar, we're here because you're not here for this reason. Some of you are, but I'm here because I think liberty and freedom is the way to improve the lives of human beings. You know how hard it is to convince one person that that's a good idea? It's so hard. If you think about the long-term trends of ideology, philosophy inside politics, very hard to move the world. Very hard. It's very hard to control. Okay, other question. Yeah.
You spoke about the unwritten rules of social rules and the connection between them to the economics rules, unwritten too. And we all know that there are big differences between cultures about the matter of how people respect those rules. And, for example, in Israel, you can stop a woman in the street and to say to her how cute is a baby. But in Europe, in some places in Europe, you can't do so. So what I want to ask is that if you see a connection or influence between those respect to the rules, to the unwritten social rules, to the economics in different countries. And if I would focus in Israel, I would ask that if you can say that our Israel is allowed to break the rules.
Yeah.
It's good to our economy.
But that's the rule. That's the rule in Israel. You don't keep the rules.
So but if you see a connection between those cultures to the economics of different
That's a very interesting question. Everybody hear the question? What's the connection between culture, the unwritten rules of cultural interaction, and the economy? I think it's a great question. I think both Israel and the United States, there's a certain respect for nonconformity, people who don't follow the rules, right? By the way, the rules are very interesting, right? The rules do the rules liberate us or do they control us? To some extent, the rules allow us, because we know what the rules are, to plan and to understand how we're going to interact with other people. So there's certain advantages to keeping the rules, but also there's entertainment. to not keeping the rules. You send a signal, right? You send a signal when you keep the rules. You send a signal when you don't keep the rules. My favorite example of the non-rule keeper, Steve Jobs. If you read his biography by Walter Isaacson, which I recommend to everybody, it's a fascinating book. There's a new book out that says that was too harsh. He really was a nicer person, probably. But he was a strange person. He did many things that were socially unacceptable. Probably wasn't the best father. Okay? He didn't keep the father rules either. He didn't keep the business rules, didn't keep the father rules. So it's a mixed bag. But my point is, their motto, which he loved, was think different. That's another way of saying don't just follow all the rules. Get outside the box. So those are important for innovation, creativity. You don't want a rule keeper. I remember a CEO of a Fortune 100 company telling me that he didn't like his human resources department, the people in charge of hiring and the rules of employment. Why? Because they always wanted everybody to look the same. He said, but our profits came from the geniuses who didn't fit in the box, didn't fit in the form, didn't fill out the form, didn't want to fill out the form. He says, if you don't have those people, we have no company. I need a lot of those people around. So I think it's an interesting observation you've made that in Israeli culture, and if you think about, the stereotype is your military is an untraditional military, right? In the United States, other countries, the military is very keep the rules, stand straight, da-da-da. In Israel, it's more relaxed. It's not even the clothing is not as regimented, and that encourages creativity. I think there's some truth to that. But of course, it's hard to know which way causation runs. Is it that the fact that Israelis don't keep the rules is what makes them creative? Or is it the fact that Israelis are people who are very creative, so they don't keep the rules, right? And I'd say the same is true in the United States. We are known for being a culture of nonconformity, mavericks, people who break out of the normal ways of doing things. And those are the people, to quote Steve Jobs, who put a dent in the universe. Those are the people who change the world. Some of them change it for the worse. In my interesting example I talk about in my book on Adam Smith about a friend of mine who was talking about a friend of his. It's very apropos. You'll like this, Bob. He's throwing a conference in Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. And he gets a call like a week or two before the conference, and the hotel says, we promised you so many rooms, we can only give you like half. He says, well, we have a contract. He says, sue me. I got a better offer. The English word for that is opportunistic. Being opportunistic is taking advantage of opportunities. Sometimes being opportunistic is a sign of being clever, and sometimes it's a sign of being cruel, right? An economist, David Rose, talks about the fact that if you can avoid people if you can find a way in your culture to have people who don't exploit every opportunity to take advantage of someone, that's a good thing. So my example is that my wife and I wanted to spend an evening in Big Sur, California, which is a very beautiful place. Very remote, very desolate, very few places to stay. The only place I could find, we only had one night. Every place required you to stay at least 2 nights. Being an economist, I said to the owner, I'll pay you for 2 nights. I only stay for 1, but I'll pay you for 2. All of a sudden, you could stay for 1 night. She thought that was a great idea. She said, the only problem is that it's only a couple days. I said this actually. This was like Wednesday, like Tuesday. I said, we're coming Thursday. I said, how am I going to get you the check to hold the room? This is not a hotel. This is just one person who owns a little cottage, a little cabin on the mountain. She said, oh, don't worry about it. Just come. And said, bring cash. And when you leave in the morning, I won't be there, she said. Think about this. She said, I'm not going to be there. When you leave in the morning, just leave the cash on the breakfast table. Now, I'm not going to tell you how much money it was, but it was a lot of money. It's a very large amount of money. And I thought, well, this is, as an economist, I thought, this is a bad thing. Let's count the number of ways this can go wrong, okay? Number one, I lie. I don't leave the money. And when she says, oh, no, I forgot. She said, don't worry, leave the money on the breakfast table. My cleaning lady will get it and bring it to me. I'm thinking, okay, so I could not leave the money. And when she says I didn't get the money, what would I say? The cleaning lady stole it. It's not my problem. What's the next possibility? Next possibility is I leave the money, the cleaning lady steals it. The woman says, where's the money? I said, I left it. She said, your cleaning lady said it wasn't there. The third possibility, I leave the money, the cleaning lady takes it, gives it to the woman, and she tells me I never got the money. This is a terrible system. But I wanted to stay in Big Sur, so we went. We had a beautiful day. When we left, I laid out the money on the table, and I took a picture of it. I still have that picture. It's embarrassing. Why would I take a picture of it? I can put the money back in my pocket after I took the picture. But I felt, somehow I could at least say to her, look, I took a picture. I did leave it. And what happened? The cleaning lady took the money, gave it to the lady. Everything was fine. That's great. When you have that culture of trust and honesty, you get more economic activity because I don't have to worry about buying a video camera that shows me leaving the room, leaving the money, that she installs. I don't say, oh, well, this will never work out. This is a road to disaster. I'm not going to come. If you have trust, things work out better. Another example, I'm in New York, which is famous for being a place where people don't trust each other, and I'm selling back some camera equipment, and I've got a box with lenses and a camera, and the guy opens the box, he sees the cameras there, he closes up, he pushes, he goes, and he starts to pay me. This is at Adorama. It's one of the two big photo stores in New York. I said, aren't you going to open the rest of the box? Aren't you going to check and make sure that I put in the other equipment that you're paying me for? He said, nah, he said, you wouldn't sleep well at night if you cheated me. And he was right, as it turned out, right? But he didn't know that. But he trusted me. It must have been the look on my face. I don't know why, right? But if you live in that world, that's a better world. Because you don't have to spend your whole time opening every box. You get more transactions. You get more economic activity. Another question. Last question. Yeah.
We talk about handling the symptoms. And it sounds like that handling the cause is much way easier or as difficult as handling the symptoms. So why people handle the symptoms? Why they make the road wider instead of actually?
So one of my favorite blogs is Marginal Revolution. I used to teach at George Mason. It's a blog of two George Mason professors, Tyler Cowen and Alex Tabarrok. So Alex wrote a post recently on Marginal Revolution about the crazy world of California water. Okay? So I'm not going to get the numbers right. I apologize. I meant to quote it, but literally. But basically, here's the idea. Almonds are very popular right now. How many people like almonds? You should. They're very good for you. But they're very popular. And China is buying a lot of almonds because they're growing. I don't know what they're doing with them, but they're into almonds. And most of the almonds in the world are grown in California. By the way, I did an Econ Talk interview with a guy about bees. How do you say bees, Beavereed? What is it? Devorium? One of the most interesting things in the world. I'm just going to tell you this because you just should know this. It's the greatest. So in America, virtually every honeybee, the Devorium that make Devash, is that correct? Devash Devorium? All the honeybees are in hives. They're not wild. They're farmers, beekeepers have them. Every spring, they take all the bees, all of them in America, to California. Now think about that by itself. It's fascinating. How do you get the bees from North Carolina, where they sometimes are, or Florida, to California? You know how you do it? You have you have a bee leader and you whistle and then he takes them all. No, you put them on a truck, which is mind-boggling. And every once in a while, the truck falls over and there's a spill of bees and honey and it's an enormous disaster for everybody. But they take it on a truck to California. The bees pollinate the almond trees. Then they take them up to Oregon or Washington where they pollinate the cherry trees. And then they take them to the Dakotas where the bees get to just hang out and play with the flowers. It's so beautiful. They get kind of vitalized. It's so beautiful. But it's this incredible migration that is not emergent, that is controlled by the economic incentives. And all the shkedim, almonds, let's do, I don't know, whatever. The almonds and the almond, we'll do them both. The almonds and the almond trees are taken care of by these bees. So this I knew about, but what I didn't know about is it takes an unbelievable amount of water to get an almond tree to make almonds. So what Alex shows is that because there would be, the number of almonds in California would be a tiny fraction of what it actually is if the almond farmers had to pay the real price of the water. And the price of almonds would be higher, and people would want fewer almonds. Instead, we subsidize water for almond trees. And the cost of that is enormous compared to the amount of value we get from the almonds. And so Alex writes the following. Something like this. We're doing this crazy thing where, and I'm thinking, who's we? There's no we there. There's a group of people who are the almond farmers who have an incentive, who love cheap water. There's a bunch of taxpayers who are paying for the water who don't get any of the benefit unless they like almonds, in which case they get a small compensation. That's not a decision that we make. That's a decision that certain forces who are using the political system are taking advantage of it. And I think this is a good place to stop because I think, Omar, you're going to be talking about some of these things later. So thank you very much.